Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my February reading wrap-up. Not quite as many books as last month. Also not quite as many pieces of children's lit. I'm in the middle of a lot of pieces of children's lit right now. Longer things. This time I'm just going to sprinkle them throughout. So the first book that I finished was Remote Control by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a novella. It is following 6-year-old Fatima. She's gifted this box with a glowing green seed in it following this meteor shower. Her father ends up selling this to a politician. At first she's sad and then she sort of accepts it. One day her skin is like glowing and hot on the inside and she's hit by a car, and in that moment of like intense distress she glows green and takes the lives of everyone around her in her whole village, and so she becomes this figure. She has nothing left, so she's gonna walk and look for this seed, and a sort of folklore in progress, mythology in progress, this like daughter of death, angel of death. It was such a good short story, right? Like it's a novella. We spend a short time with Fatima. We can suspend our disbelief just long enough. I liked the folklore in progress aspect of this. I just think it's a really great, beautiful piece of African futurist storytelling. I was really excited to borrow this from the library. I finished this on February 3rd. If you like folklore and if you're looking for like a non-European type of storytelling, non-European science fiction, it has the vibe of folklore, folklore in progress is how I want to describe this. I would highly recommend this. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I borrowed it from the library. What a way to start February. Then I had been plugging away at The Secret History by Donna Tart since I believe December. So this is part of a project of mine that I'm plugging away at in the background. So The Secret History and Jonathan Strange and Dr. Norrell, whatever that's called. It has too long of a title, but both of the books that R.F. Kuang cites as influencing Babel, I wanted to read both of them and then reread Babel and think about how these texts play with each other. I decided to start with A Secret History. So this is a story of a scholarship student named Richard who goes away to university, and he likes classics. When he starts at this university, he wants to get into this program, and they're like, ooh, I don't know if you want to do that. Like, our classics prof's a weirdo. He's very selective. Like, he literally only has 4 students in his course, and like, it's really not recommended because he takes over your whole schedule and you end up really isolated. You're not a really well-rounded student. And he's like, but those guys look so cool. And so he sort of works his way to get invited into this program and then gets sucked into this really isolating space. You know from the very beginning that one of the characters, Bunny, is dead. And so you're sort of working this murder mystery in reverse. Like, you know that Bunny is dead. Then you learn that he's part of this like core group of students that Richard thought was really cool. So like, how do you get from Bunny being dead to, well, they're all friends in this course? It's very much looking at privilege, because some of these kids are just so wealthy. Like, Richard is a scholarship student, has nothing, at one point almost dies because of the student accommodation that he ends up living in. It has no roof. He's in a cold climate. They have a like legit winter, and his room, his winter break room, because the dorms close over the winter, where he ends up staying, has no roof. It has no heat. It has nothing in it, and he owns nothing. And so he's like freezing to death for winter break. Everybody else is off digging around Europe, having fun, spending money, seeing like great cultural sites that are relevant to their studies. And he's like freezing to death and working part-time. It was a strange and twisty mess, and I do think it was worth it in the end. Like, I think just sort of watching this mess unfold in the academic setting was a lot of fun for myself. I do like books about university, books about studying, books about students. Would I recommend it? Yes and no. Really depends on the type of reader that you are. It took me a very long time to read this, and at times the characters were just so grating, but there is that like very compelling character study, the mystery of like, why did you do this? I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I finished it on February 4th, but it did take me months. It took me months to finish this, and this is not a big book. Then I reread Women Talking by Miriam Toews because the film adaptation of it is one of the nominees for Best Pictures at the Oscars this year, so I decided to reread the book. Now, I had read the physical book the first time. This time I was listening to it on audio, and then I do want to talk about what the film does as well. I'm thinking of doing a separate video on the 3 forms of this story. It's based on a true event in which women in a Mennonite colony in South America kept waking up bruised and actually assaulted, and then they started getting pregnant, and then the men in the community like gaslit them, like, oh, like it's demons visiting you in the night, or like, ooh, you're just crazy, you just want attention and you're being sinful. And then one of the women stays up and catches a young man in their community climbing through her window with cow tranquilizer, I think. Local police have gotten involved, they've arrested those men, and the men who are not directly involved have all gone to town to bail out the men in jail, leaving the women in the community. And so they have a certain amount of time to discuss. Are they going to do nothing? Are they going to stay and fight? Or are they going to leave? And so the book is chronicling these women sharing their perspectives on what would be the best move. They invite a soft man. They invite the school teacher, a failed farmer. He's not really considered a man in the community. He wasn't taken with to go to the city to bail out the men. They invite this man named August to take minutes on their meeting so that there's a record of them having this conversation. In the book, you know that August is writing down the minutes. We're reading what he is writing down about the women. The audiobook is narrated by a man to like underscore the point that these women's voices, these women's thoughts are always mediated by men, and the film does something else entirely, and I would like to talk about that in an entirely separate video because it has a different impact. Obviously, this is one of my favorite books. Rereading it did not change that, so I finished listening to that on February 3rd. I do think the audiobook is a very interesting experience. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and that was a reread. Then I read Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy. So this is the author who wrote Once There Were Wolves, which I read last year. This is her first book, and it does deal with a lot of similar themes, but I think I maybe liked this one better. They're very closely tied for me, even though they're fairly similar. You would think that I would like one more than the other. So this is set in a near future where many creatures are severely endangered or extinct already, and due to climate change. And Franny Stone, our protagonist, is on a quest to follow the last Arctic terns in the world on their final migration to Antarctica. And so she has worked her way onto a fishing boat. She's offering them this opportunity to have like the catch of a lifetime, because she feels that where the terns go on their migration, their terns are going to be following the food. So if there are any fish left in the ocean, if you follow the terns on their migration, you're gonna find that catch of a lifetime. And that's sort of how she's pitched this. We're unraveling the pieces of her life that have led her to this point. We're not really sure why she is so unmoored, but she is, and that will unfold. So there's a little bit of mystery there as well. I'm not saying this is a mystery, not at all, but there's this withholding of information about Franny. I devoured this because I was fascinated to figure out what is making Franny tick. It's always a little horrifying with these novels when you see just a near future where human selfishness has resulted in the logical conclusion of like mass destruction of ecosystems and what that impact is like. So I do find that very anxiety provoking. Overall, the story for me of migration outweighs that sort of ick feeling that I struggle with. So I finished that on February 6th. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars on Storygraph. It's from my TBR. Then I read Crumbs by Diane Stirling. So this is a graphic novel that I impulse purchased because I liked the cover art and it was fine. I think this might have been a webcomic that was released with lots of time between the parts, because I sat down and I read this in one evening and there were like big jumps in time that I found difficult to get adjusted to. Like I always sort of had to reassess like, oh, like what has happened? But if it was something that you were reading like as it came out in a webcomic form, obviously there would be those natural gaps while the artist is working on this. So this is about Ray, who is a young witch and she's quite gifted. She's working on being fast-tracked into witch government. This has been her goal always. And then she starts dating a boy named Laurie, who is kind of a failing musician. They meet at a cafe and she sort of becomes part of his friends, a group of friends. And I think for the first time, she's really feeling this tug between like pursuing career goals that are maybe not the most satisfying to her when she's there, versus having friends and a relationship and something more normal and safe feeling. And like that push and pull between the two. I think it's realistic to find yourself sort of torn between like what feels really good and exciting in the now versus working hard for something that, like when you hit a bump in the road the way that Ray has, it's not quite what she expected, right? She's interning, she's not getting to do what she wants. She has to do what they're asking of her, and she wants to explore and pursue and learn other facets of her magic, but they're really like, no, we want you in this bubble. Like this is all the work that you're gonna do because you're special and unique. So I did like that aspect of it. The art is cute. The idea is cute. I just feel like my life would have been fine without it. I hate to say that. It's not like a new favorite thing at this moment. I finished this on February 10th. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars and this was a new buy. Then for work, I am now starting to read work's back catalog in my own time. At this point, I have been tasked with doing some, if you like this, read these titles. There are quite a few titles in like doing this exercise and doing this work. There are quite a few titles that I'd seen quite a bit at the bookstore when I worked as a bookseller and never picked up. We're working with Canadian children's lit, and so some of it is not as well known. I'm starting to poke at the backlist a little bit and see what my library has. And so one of those titles was Borders by Thomas King, illustrated by Natasha Donovan. I had actually encountered Thomas King's story like in an anthology for grown-ups, and it's about a boy and his mother getting trapped between the Canadian and US borders because the Blackfoot Nation runs across both countries. It is settler colonials that have arbitrarily imposed borders on this, divided up the nation. And so like when she gets to the border, you have to declare a national identity, right? And she refuses to say, well, I'm coming from the Canadian side of the border, I'm a Canadian. She says, no, I'm Blackfoot. And they're like, well, we can't let you through if you're Blackfoot. Like, you have to say you're Canadian or American. And she's like, oh, I'm Blackfoot. And like, she keeps getting put through this like border control thing, and they end up stuck between the two borders because now she can't get back either. When she gets to the Canadian border, she has to declare that she's Canadian to get over the Canadian border, and she refuses to do that. They end up stuck sleeping in their car in this sort of limbo space between the two borders because neither side will let them through until they garner enough media attention. I really like that adding these illustrations makes this story that I've encountered in anthologies really accessible to young readers. So this is being targeted to middle grade students. So we're looking at 9 to 12-year-olds. And I think it takes something that I don't know that a 9 to 12-year-old would be able to read and like engage with, if I remember correctly. Like, I encountered this story in university, I think. Giving it the visuals, I think, really helps make it accessible. The illustrations are beautiful. Natasha Donovan has a very aesthetic, not uncanny valley way of illustrating. Like, something that I run into a lot is this, there's a fine line between having like a stylized cartoon human that I'm fine with and something that just borders on being real that I find deeply disturbing. Natasha Donovan's illustrations supplementing Thomas King's story are beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I finished that on February 17th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars and I borrowed that from the library. Then I read The Secret Pocket, which was written by Peggy Janicki and illustrated by Carrielynn Victor. Janicki is sharing her mother's experience of surviving residential school, so specifically the LeJac residential school, and it recounts the neglect that these children faced and their resilience. So The Secret Pocket was something that the girls, they took the knowledge that their mothers and grandmothers and aunties had taught them about sewing, and they sewed secret pockets into their school-issued clothes so that when they like snuck in the kitchen or had the opportunity to be near food, they could fill this secret pocket with food and then share it with the younger girls who weren't getting enough to eat so that they remained alive. So these skills literally saved their lives. It's kind of cool because this story is actually given to Indigenous graduates at the University of Fraser Valley in a hidden pocket sewn into the graduation gown. I would say that this story does not conform to settler colonial picture book expectations. It's a picture book. It's like 3 to 6 year olds. There's maybe too much writing because it's clearly meant to be a story that is told out loud. This was an oral story that was told to Peggy by her mother. Not conforming to picture book conventions makes sense in that way. And I really appreciate that the oral nature of this storytelling is preserved in this formatting. It's just not quite what you expect if you are used to North American, British, like English settler colonial picture books. This is one of the places where the images feel really uncanny valley to me. I'm gonna see if I can find them and put a couple on the screen. Here's the thing. I can't imagine applying like cute illustrations like we see in Crumbs and a lot of children's picture books, like the Disney-fied, round, soft, colorful characters that we see in picture books. I can't imagine applying that sort of illustration to a story about genocide and child abuse. But at the same time, the illustrations here just give me the willies. It's total uncanny valley and I don't like it. But I also can't see the style of illustration that I like working. You could do what you want with my reaction to it, but overall, the complete package, it is important to record and to pass on these stories, especially because the first-hand accounts are going to disappear in the same way that Holocaust survivors are approaching an age where pretty soon we are not going to have somebody who was physically there, witnessed it with their own eyes. We're only going to have their stories and their accounts. We're starting to run into the same thing with residential school survivors. I mean, the last one closed in my lifetime, and I'm not that old, but there were generations of Indigenous folks that were impacted by this, and that has a trickle-down effect, and it's important not to forget this because I feel like I didn't learn about residential schools until university. That never came up in my Canadian history courses from kindergarten to grade 12. I think the curriculum has changed, so kids are learning about this earlier, but it's also something that we seem to like hide. As Canadians, we're not running around advertising that we did a genocide and like we did a genocide. Settler colonials did a genocide. And we're seeing the effects of that, and so I think stories like this are really important, especially for readers of all ages, in formats that are acceptable and accessible to kids at all ages to sort of be introduced to this idea. In a similar vein, I also read from our back catalog at work Sugar Falls by David A. Robertson. Scott B. Henderson, I believe, did the illustrations, and Donovan Yasia did the color work, I think. And so Sugar Falls is another residential school story, Betsy's story, and it's a story of intergenerational trauma. So Betsy was abandoned by a mother who experienced the residential school system and was like thrown out into the cold, was adopted adopted by another Indigenous family and lived with them, was treated and loved like one of their own children. And then the priests came to the house and they were like, hey, your kid needs to come to this school or you'll get fined, you'll be in trouble. And so they sent Betsy to the school. This does have physical, sexual, emotional abuse on page. You do see a priest coming into the little girls' rooms at night and leading them away. You learn about the one little girl's strategy for like disassociating during the experience, and how when it happens to Betsy, she keeps that advice from her friend in mind and learns to disassociate. I can't remember if the child goes into the river to unalive themselves intentionally, or if they attempt to escape and drown. I can't remember which, and I know that's awful, but the impact either way that I took away from it was like, holy shit. In a 9 to 12 middle grade graphic novel, we are seeing very like bald, no frills, no fluff, no hiding this child abuse on page. Like overall, it is a story of resilience and survival. Like it asks us to remember and bear witness to the trauma and to the atrocities of this colonial project. And the illustrations here are also a little uncanny valley, not as bad as The Secret Pocket. So I finished this on February 20th. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I did borrow that from the library. Then the last book for work here is another graphic novel from our backlist, and that is Swan Lake: Quest for the Kingdoms by Ray Terciero and illustrated by Megan Kearney. And this is a middle grade graphic novel that follows enemies to friends. We have Odette and Dilly, and they are from warring kingdoms, and they work to prove that Dilly's father didn't curse Odette to turn into a swan. And they go on this quest. Along the way, they collect some more friends from the other kingdoms, and they are working together to solve this mystery. And it's like that power of friendship. And this has really cute illustrations. It's very much my jam in terms of like aesthetics. Not only does Odette turn into a swan, and so she has like a physical difference. Dilly has lost a leg in an accident, and so she has like a, my brain just broke. It's not a surrogate, prosthetic. Oh my gosh, my brain is tired. She has a prosthetic leg. Yes, I really liked the friendships. I liked the representation of different bodies on page. I liked the message about loving yourself. And also there's an opening for a sequel, and I am here for the sequel if it happens. I finished that on February 20th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I borrowed that from the library. I just did the live stream for this last night as I'm filming this, and I will link it above. I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is my 3rd or 4th reread of this book, and I'm not gonna say too much about it. Gothic horror or like critique of gendered roles and the nuclear family and parenting in the 1950s. Check out the live stream. I will say every time I reread this, I appreciate it more and more. I actually don't want to talk about it because I literally just spent like almost 2 hours talking about it last night. So I'm gonna link that if you're interested. Check it out. I finished that on February 19th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it was a reread. The last, is it the last book? Yeah, the last book I read is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. So every month, patrons are helping me, voting patrons are helping me to tackle my unread books. I have a prompt. I've given them a picture of 2 books that I own, and they're gonna vote. And the book that won for February was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is the only Toni Morrison that I own. And it also happens to be her first novel, which I feel like works out really well because it's kind of nice when you find an author and you like them and you realize that you're reading their first book. With Shirley Jackson, I read like 2 of her final works and then went back to her earlier works, and of course you can see her developing as an author, whereas I'm definitely interested in reading more Toni Morrison after this, and I started at the beginning, so like it can only get better as she works on her craft, right? This is the story of Piccola, a young girl who has an alcoholic, abusive father, and We see her in foster care on and off with our narrator, Claudia's family. Our main character doesn't even get to tell her own story. It's Claudia, who's a few years younger than Piccola, who is telling this story, telling us about Piccola. Hi, hello, Editing Emily here. So I am listening to myself struggle about The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and I think I just want to come back in and synthesize these thoughts. It's not young adult fiction, but it is looking at adolescence. It is looking at being young, being a child, and the effects that racism, sexism, and classism have on young people's construction of their self. Like during the formative years, experiencing these isms drastically shapes self, right? And we see that with Piccola, who really internalizes the racism, sexism, and classism that she experiences, compared to Claudia, who we see experiencing that, and instead of folding under it, she resists, right? Like she's given these white baby dolls, and her desire is to cut them up, cut them open. It's not an object that she loves or admires. Whiteness is not something that she wants to achieve, and so she's resisting this in the formation of her identity, whereas Piccola is sort of crushed under this. Everyone marks her as ugly because colorism. She has dark skin. Her response to this is to wish for blue eyes, to internalize white beauty standards, racist white beauty standards, and to aspire to that in the formation of her identity. I feel like I don't have enough context for American literature, for Black American literature. Like this, I think, is considered a modern classic. Toni Morrison is considered a modern classic author. This is my first Toni Morrison. I don't have enough context within her body of works. Like if this is a common theme, looking at adolescence, looking at construction of identity, but I am curious to keep reading her, preferably in publication order, just because I have started at the beginning, to see if she continues to look at intersections of identity and identity formation. I finished that on February 26th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and that came from my TBR. Those are the books that I read in February. Let me know your thoughts if you've read any of these in the comments down below. Before we go, we have to thank my patrons who make videos like this possible. They shape the work that I am able to do. They allow me to produce content like this for free. In March, there are 2 patron exclusive live streams. We have the first mini live stream on Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which is happening on March 15th. We're gonna get together and chat about the first of these seasonal novellas in different seasons. Then at the end of the month, we're gonna get together to discuss Christine. That is a patron exclusive. I know I sort of brushed off Hill House because I just talked about it, but this year I am hosting 2 book clubs. The second one is free for everyone on YouTube. We are exploring the haunted house together. That was the live stream on Hill House that we just did. In April, our next haunted house book is White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi, and if you're interested in that, keep an eye out on this channel on the community tab. All the information for it, discussion questions, all that jazz, I will be posting ahead of the live stream, as far ahead as I can. That is free for everybody to join in. So thank you to my patrons who make content like this possible. I really appreciate the work that they enable me to do. If you are interested in becoming a patron and having access to the Stephen King content, the Stephen King Book Club, link is in the description box always. And if you like what you see here, you want to support the channel, keep me making content that is free for everyone on YouTube, Patreon is the way to do that. Liking, subscribing, leaving me a comment, that always helps. So yeah, chat with me about the books. Thank you for watching. I hope that you are doing well, that you are staying safe, and I will see you soon with another video.